24. U.S. allies are reacting with caution or just flat out refusing a request from Donald Trump to help secure oil shipments through the Strait of Hormuz. Iran has almost entirely halted traffic in the critical waterway, which usually accounts for about 20% of the world's oil exports, sending crude prices soaring across the globe. Early in the day, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer said his country would not be drawn into a wider war. France has been non-committal, while Germany, Italy, Australia, and Japan have all said they would not help reopen the strait.
Welcome to Dr. John Podcast. So this is happening. NATO Secretary General publicly broke with Trump, calling his Hormuz military operation a unilateral adventure and announcing that Allied forces will not follow Trump's command. It's the most damning rebuke of an American president by NATO in its entire history.
The sharpest refusal to Trump's request came from Germany. Take a listen to what the country's defense minister had to say earlier.
What does the world expect? What does Donald Trump expect from, let's say, a handful or two handful of European frigates in the Strait of Hormuz that the powerful American Navy cannot accomplish there alone?
The alliance America built is openly refusing to follow its leader. Then France's president stepped to his own microphone, not entangled in unclear conflict. Those were his words. The leader of one of America's oldest allies looking at the Iran war and calling it unclear, calling it something France wants no part of.
We're telling you a few moments ago about those new words from President Trump. It is, in fact, contained in a Truth Social post. It is quite a lengthy one, but I think it's worth bringing it to you in full. He says the United States has been informed by most of our NATO allies in inverted commas, that they don't want to get involved with our military operation against the terrorist regime of Iran in the Middle East. This despite the fact that almost every country strongly agreed with what we're doing and that Iran cannot in any way, shape or form be allowed to have a nuclear weapon. I'm not surprised by their action, however, because I always considered NATO, where we spend hundreds of billions of dollars per year protecting these same countries, to be a one-way street. We will protect them, but they will do nothing for us, in particular in a time of need.
Then Germany halted all Bundeswehr deployments, pending a parliamentary vote that nobody expects to go in Trump's direction. Japan refused warships. Australia refused warships. And then China blockaded the Malacca Strait in direct retaliation, meaning the global shipping consequences of this war just expanded dramatically at the exact moment every American ally decided they were done standing next to it. Trump's response? He went on Truth Social and called NATO obsolete freeloaders. He said NATO faces extinction. Freeloaders abandon America during victory. 18 million views. That was the diplomatic strategy. A social media post calling the Atlantic Alliance freeloaders while America stands alone in the Strait of Hormuz. While gas prices hit levels nobody thought possible. While Americans are dead. While the military high command is now reportedly urging 25th Amendment action. Here is what people are not understanding about the magnitude of what just happened. This is not a diplomatic spat. This is not allies disagreeing on tactics. This is not routine alliance tension that gets smoothed over at the next summit with handshakes and a communique. What happened is a fundamental break, a public, documented, on-the-record break between the United States and the entire Western alliance structure over an active military operation. It has never happened in the modern era. Not like this. Not this openly, not with this level of coordination among allies, all saying the same thing at the same time with this level of clarity. And the timing lands on top of everything else that has already happened this week. The press conference meltdown, the Capitol Hill confrontation, the impeachment vote, the resignation, the Oval Office speech that backfired. The timing makes this the moment that tips the entire crisis into territory that cannot be walked back. Because there is a difference between a political crisis and a strategic crisis. And what happened today turned this into both simultaneously. This is the day America went alone, and the world noticed, and Washington noticed, and the military noticed. Let's get into what the NATO statement actually means in practical military terms, because the diplomatic language obscures how serious this is on the ground. When NATO says Allied naval assets will operate independently of Trump-directed Hormuz missions, what that means operationally is that the United States is now conducting unilateral military operations in one of the most strategically sensitive waterways on the planet without the coordination, the intelligence sharing, the logistical support, and the political cover that Allied participation provides. That is not a minor operational adjustment. That is a fundamental change in the strategic picture. And it happened publicly, meaning every adversary watching, Iran, China, Russia, knows it happened. They can see the seam. They can see exactly where the alliance has fractured, and they are already moving to exploit it. China blockading the Malacca Strait is the proof of that in real time. The Malacca Strait is not a secondary waterway. It handles roughly 40% of global maritime trade, and China just blocked it in direct response to the Iran operation at the exact moment America's allies stepped back. That is coordinated strategic exploitation of a visible seam in American alliance architecture, and the economic consequences of that blockade landing on top of gas prices are going to be felt by ordinary Americans fast, and felt hard in ways that make the political situation even worse. Now let's walk through the Allied positions one by one. France. Macron's statement, "not entangled in unclear conflict," is not just a policy disagreement between governments. It is a public characterization of the Iran war as unclear from a permanent member of the UN Security Council and one of NATO's founding members. Macron looked at the intelligence, looked at the justification, looked at the cost and the American lives lost, and concluded the objective is not clear enough to commit French assets. And he said that out loud in public on the record. That does not get walked back with a social media post calling him a freeloader. That statement is now the official position of France, and it is not moving. Germany. Scholz halting Bundeswehr deployments pending a parliamentary vote is significant for a very specific reason. It means Germany is not just declining to participate. Germany is making the decision a parliamentary matter, meaning even if Scholz wanted to reverse course overnight, he has now handed the decision to the legislature. And that legislature is not going to approve deployments in support of an operation that NATO itself has publicly called a unilateral adventure. The German door just closed procedurally in a way that makes reopening it structurally very difficult. Japan and Australia. These are not European allies with European political complications. These are Indo-Pacific partners, partners whose entire security architecture is built around the US alliance system, partners who have historically been among the most reliable supporters of American operations in the region. And they both said no. That tells you the refusal is not a European thing. It is not about NATO bureaucracy or transatlantic politics. It is a judgment about this specific operation, this specific war, this specific administration that is now shared across the entire alliance structure regardless of geography or historical relationship. And then there is the Trump response. And this matters enormously. NATO faces extinction. Freeloaders abandon America during victory. 18 million views on Truth Social. That was the diplomatic response to the most significant Allied break in post-war American history. Think about what that response signals to every leader in every Allied capital watching right now. It signals that the person running the American government does not understand or does not care what has happened to American strategic positioning in the world. It signals that the diplomatic response to a historic break is social media language that no foreign ministry anywhere can work with or respond to constructively. And it signals that the gap between where American foreign policy is and where the rest of the Western world is not narrowing. It is widening. And it is widening in public with millions of people watching it happen in real time. Now connect all of this to the broader crisis. This NATO story does not exist in isolation. It lands on top of an administration that has been in visible public collapse all week from multiple directions simultaneously. The resignation letter from the counterterrorism chief established a credibility problem with the war's justification. A document from the former counterterrorism chief saying there was no imminent threat from Iran and the Iraq playbook was being repeated. The Capitol Hill confrontation and the hot mic audio established a domestic political collapse. A president threatening his own party members on a recording that millions of people heard. The Oval Office speech that backfired established that the White House has lost its ability to manage the narrative even on its best stage with its biggest audience. And now the NATO operational divorce, with Japan and Australia refusing warships, with China blockading Malacca, with the NATO chief calling it a unilateral adventure on the record, establishes that the international isolation is now complete. Every layer of the crisis is now visible simultaneously from every direction. Here is the number that sits underneath all of this and demands attention. The military high command is now reportedly urging 25th Amendment action, not politicians, not Democrats, not protest movements or media commentators. The military high command, the people responsible for executing the operations that are now being conducted without Allied support in an increasingly isolated and strategically exposed position. While the commander-in-chief posts about NATO extinction on social media, those people looking at the operational reality, looking at the diplomatic collapse, looking at the domestic political picture, are apparently making the judgment that the situation requires constitutional action. That is an extraordinary development. The timeline has been accelerating all week. Each new development is adding concrete weight to a calculation that is already within one decision of crossing a threshold. America is now militarily isolated in an active conflict zone, and the consequences are immediate and severe. This is not an abstraction. This is not a diplomatic talking point about alliance management. The United States is currently conducting naval operations in the Strait of Hormuz, one of the most strategically critical waterways on Earth, without Allied naval coordination, without Allied intelligence sharing, without Allied logistical support, and without the political legitimacy that coalition participation provides. And China is already exploiting that isolation by blockading the Malacca Strait in direct response. That is the operational picture right now, and it is an extraordinarily exposed position. The U.S. military does not fight alone by design. The entire post-Cold War operational doctrine is built around coalition warfare, shared intelligence, coordinated logistics, and the diplomatic weight of multilateral action. Strip all of that away, and you are left with a unilateral operation in a strategic choke point facing an adversarial response on a second front with no Allied assets to coordinate with. The Malacca Strait handles 40% of global maritime trade, including enormous volumes of goods flowing directly to and from the United States. China has turned a regional Iran war into a global supply chain crisis at the exact moment American allies stepped back, leaving the U.S. without the coalition leverage needed to respond effectively on multiple fronts at the same time. That is the strategic exposure created by the NATO break in real time. And a social media post about freeloaders does not close that exposure. It signals to every adversary watching that the exposure is going to remain open. The military high command urging 25th Amendment action is the most significant development of this entire crisis. I want to be completely direct about this because it matters more than anything else we have covered. Politicians break with presidents. Party members create distance. Senators signal conviction support. Those things are significant, but they follow predictable political logic. When the military high command, the people responsible for executing the operational orders, starts urging 25th Amendment action, that is a different category of development entirely. These are not people making political calculations about midterm survival. These are not members of Congress worried about the next primary. These are the people looking at an active military operation being conducted without Allied support in an increasingly isolated strategic position with a second front opening in Malacca and the commander-in-chief responding with social media posts about NATO extinction. And they are apparently making a constitutional judgment that the situation requires intervention. Section 4 of the 25th Amendment. The Vice President and a majority of cabinet officers transmit a written declaration to Congress. No floor vote required, no Senate trial to schedule, no waiting period. The moment the declaration is transmitted, the President is immediately suspended from exercising the powers of the office pending congressional review. That is how fast this mechanism moves. And with cabinet members in reported revolt, with the military high command urging action, with the timeline accelerating from serious analysts, somebody inside that building is very close to making a decision that triggers the fastest constitutional removal mechanism available. The Republican Party is now doing open survival math, and the answer keeps getting worse. The midterm projections show a number of House seats at risk, that is not a wave election. It is not a rough cycle that the party absorbs and recovers from. It is a political extinction event for down-ballot Republicans everywhere. It wipes out committee chairmanships built over decades. It ends careers that took a generation to build. It flips the House in a way that reshapes the legislative landscape for years. And every Republican member in a marginally competitive district is staring at that number and making the same cold calculation about personal survival. The defections on the impeachment vote were the first visible breaks. The senators signaling conviction support were the next wave. The quiet distancing happening in Republican offices right now, the carefully worded statements, the conspicuous silences, the sudden unavailability for comment, that is the third wave, and it is building momentum. When the NATO story broke, when the NATO chief called it a unilateral adventure on the record, when Japan and Australia said no, when China blocked the Malacca Strait, and when Trump responded with a social media post calling allies freeloaders, the Republicans who had been holding on made their final calculation. Because now it is not just a domestic political crisis with impeachment math and conviction odds. Now it is an international strategic crisis with America militarily isolated in an active conflict zone and a second front opening in global shipping lanes. Now it is a situation where the commander-in-chief's response to the worst allied break in post-war history is millions of views on social media. That is not a position any Republican member can defend in a midterm campaign. That is not a record any campaign manager thinks is survivable in a competitive district anywhere in the country, and the members know it. The acceleration in the 25th Amendment timeline tells you that even people inside the executive branch are arriving at the same conclusion. Here is the complete picture of where we are right now. A NATO operational divorce, public on the record, with the NATO chief calling the Iran war a unilateral adventure from the podium. France calling it unclear. Germany locking the door procedurally through parliament. Japan and Australia both saying no. China blockading Malacca in direct response, turning a regional conflict into a global supply chain crisis. America militarily isolated in the Strait of Hormuz for the first time in the post-war era. The military high command urging 25th Amendment action. Cabinet members in reported revolt. A removal timeline measured in hours from serious analysts. Senate conviction odds at a level that signals inevitability. A GOP midterm extinction number that keeps moving upward. Gas prices that are crushing ordinary Americans. A social media post calling NATO freeloaders generating millions of views as a diplomatic response. In a week that started with a press conference meltdown, moved through a Capitol Hill confrontation and impeachment vote, an Oval Office speech that backfired and has now arrived here. All of it building, all of it connected, all of it pointing toward a window that is unlike anything this country has experienced in the modern political era. The NATO break did not start this crisis, but it may be the development that ends it. Because when the military high command starts making 25th Amendment calls, the clock is no longer measured in news cycles or political calculations. It is measured in hours, and that clock is running right now.